One human, one spaceship, 800,000 alien warships, fucking suicide. Captain Jesse Adams sat in the cockpit of the heavily modified ISS Defiant, humanity's last warship. He stared at the holographic tactical display, jaw clenched. It showed 800,000 Mizarian battleships in tight formation around humanity's final colony planet Avalon. Jesse gripped the control stick. His knuckles whitened. The overwhelming alien numbers made his stomach churn. The Defiant's reactor hummed, weapons primed, prototype plasma cannons, swarming AI drones, an experimental weapon of last resort, cobbled together by Earth's greatest minds in desperation. Humanity had fought the bug-like Mizarians for decades. The alien empire was hell-bent on exterminating humans to steal their worlds. Now, backed into a corner, humanity's survival depended on one ship, one man, one reckless, desperate attack. Jesse's comm crackled. Admiral Xander Roth appeared, grizzled face tight. "Jesse, you're our final hope," Roth said. "Civilian transports are still evacuating. Buy us time." "Understood." Jesse's voice was hard. "I'll give the Mizar hell." "Godspeed, son. For Earth." Jesse saluted. He cut the link and wrapped his hands around the controls. The Defiant's fusion drives growled to life. He plotted a direct course for the alien flagship. Alarms wailed. Sweat beaded his brow. Charging into the enemy fleet alone meant certain death. But Jesse had nothing left to lose. The Mizarians had already taken everything. His family, his home, his hope. Now he would take something back. Jesse shoved the throttle to full. The Defiant leaped forward, screaming toward the aliens on pillars of blue fusion fire, toward his final desperate mission, toward revenge. One ship against 800,000, suicide odds. But if this was how Jesse died, he'd make damn sure the aliens remembered it. An incoming transmission cut through the cockpit of the ISS Defiant, interrupting Captain Jesse Adams' concentration. The face of Emperor Fornax himself, the supreme ruler of the Mizarian Empire, flickered onto the view screen. The insectoid alien's dark, chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the light, his compound eyes glowing with malevolence. "Foolish human," Fornax hissed, mandibles clicking. "You dare to challenge the might of the Mizarian Empire alone? Your species' arrogance knows no bounds." Jesse smirked, his blue eyes blazing with fierce determination. He leaned forward in his seat, locking gazes with the alien emperor. "You underestimate us, Fornax. We may be outnumbered, but we're never outmatched." With a flick of his wrist, Jesse cut the transmission, Fornax's image dissolving into static. He refocused on the task at hand, hands tightening around the Defiant's controls. The human warship charged forward, weaving through a hail of searing laser fire from the Mizarian fleet. The advanced energy shields held, absorbing the brunt of the assault in flashes of shimmering blue. Jesse targeted the nearest enemy battleship with the Defiant's experimental plasma cannon. He squeezed the trigger, and a concentrated beam of incandescent energy lanced out, slicing through the alien vessel's hull like a superheated knife through butter. The Mizarian ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris, but hundreds of thousands more still remained. Undeterred, Jesse deployed the Defiant's swarm of AI combat drones. The autonomous machines poured out of the human ship like angry hornets from a kicked nest. They zipped through the chaos of battle, targeting weak points in the Mizarian ship's defenses and drawing fire away from the Defiant. The lone human warship danced through the storm of destruction, plasma cannons flaring. With each pass, Jesse and the Defiant took out dozens of enemy vessels, leaving shattered hulks and clouds of expanding gas in their wake. But even the Defiant's advanced technology couldn't overcome the sheer numbers of the Mizarian fleet forever. Slowly, inevitably, the unending barrage of laser fire began to take its toll. Warning alarms blared as the ship's energy shields started to falter, the protective barrier dimming. Jesse gritted his teeth, knuckles white on the controls. Sweat beaded his furrowed brow as he desperately tried to evade the incoming fire. He knew he had to do something drastic to turn the tide before the Defiant's defenses gave out entirely. Then he remembered the ship's last-ditch trump card, the experimental phase shift device. The technology, hastily reverse-engineered from an ancient alien artifact, could theoretically allow the Defiant to pass through solid matter. It had never been tested in combat before, the risks of using such an unpredictable system immense. But with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance and time running out, Jesse knew it was their only chance. Failure here would mean the extinction of his entire species. He took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and activated the phase shift device. The Defiant shimmered, its hull turning translucent, then vanished from sight entirely. The Mizarian fleet ceased fire, their sensors unable to track the now invisible human ship. Emperor Fornax watched the seemingly impossible feat from the bridge of his flagship, mandibles quivering with barely contained rage. "Find that ship!" he snarled at his subordinates, slamming a clawed fist onto the armrest of his command chair. "I want that human's head." But the Mizarians were too late. Jesse and the Defiant had already slipped past their defenses, speeding toward the heart of the alien fleet and the final, desperate phase of their mission to save humanity from extinction. With a flash of blinding light and a gut-wrenching lurch, the ISS Defiant burst from phase shift inside the cavernous hangar bay of Emperor Fornax's command ship. The cloaking field shimmered and dissipated, revealing the human warship in all its battle-scarred glory, squatting amid a sea of startled Mizarian shuttlecraft and maintenance drones. Captain Jesse Adams didn't hesitate. He leaped from the Defiant's airlock, handheld plasma rifle already spitting blue-white bolts of superheated death. The first squad of Fornax's elite guard to respond dissolved into smoking heaps of charred chitin, their dying shrieks echoing through the cavernous space. Alarms blared as Jesse charged deeper into the behemoth ship, following the schematics downloaded into his rifle's tactical display. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his weapon an extension of his will, each plasma bolt finding its mark with lethal precision. The corridors filled with the acrid stench of burning flesh and scorched exoskeleton as Jesse cut a swath of destruction towards the bridge. Dozens of Mizarian soldiers fell before his onslaught, their own plasma fire splashing harmlessly against his rifle's overcharged shields. At last Jesse reached the command deck. The reinforced blast doors exploded inward, reduced to molten slag by a sustained barrage from his rifle. Smoke and flames billowed into the chamber as the human warrior stepped through the breach, his eyes locked on the tall angular figure rising from the central command throne. Emperor Fornax regarded the intruder with a mixture of rage and disbelief, his compound eyes narrowing to glowing red slits. "You dare to challenge me, human?" he hissed, a pair of wickedly sharp plasma blades snicking from hidden sheaths in his armored forearms. "I will take great pleasure in adding your skull to my trophy collection." Jesse responded with a fierce grin and a hail of plasma bolts, but Fornax was ready. The Mizarian leader leaped forward, his blades flashing in a dizzying pattern, deflecting the human's fire with preternatural speed. The bridge erupted into chaos as the two commanders clashed, consoles detonating and debris raining down around them. Jesse ducked and wove, his rifle bucking, meeting each slash of Fornax's blades with a burst of plasma. The air sizzled and burned, the stench of ozone mingling with the coppery tang of spilled blood, both red and luminescent blue. For a moment it seemed the two were evenly matched. Then Fornax's blades found their mark, carving deep gashes into Jesse's battle-scarred armor. Sparks flew, and warning alarms blared, but the human only snarled, batting aside the searing plasma and surging forward with renewed fury. In a final, desperate clash, Jesse smashed Fornax's blades aside with his rifle and lunged, crashing his helmeted forehead into the Emperor's skull-like face with a sickening crunch. Ichor spurted from Fornax's shattered eyes as he staggered back, mandibles slack with shock. Seizing his chance, Jesse thrust his rifle forward and fired, the superheated plasma bolt punching clean through Fornax's thorax and erupting from his back in a spray of molten chitin. The Emperor loosed an agonized shriek, a sound that reverberated through the ship's holds like the death knell of an empire. Then he crumpled to the deck, his reign of terror ended at last by a single, determined human. Jesse stood over his fallen foe, breath coming in ragged gasps. his armor pitted and scorched. Blood, both his own and the luminous ichor of the Mizarians, painted his battered form. But his eyes blazed with the fire of victory as he turned to the ship's central computer, his lips pulling back in a feral grin. The war wasn't over, not yet. But with Fornax dead and the Defiant still intact, Jesse knew they finally had a chance to turn the tide, a chance to save what was left of humanity from the Mizarian menace, and perhaps even reclaim a future among the stars. Jesse stood over the smouldering remains of Emperor Fornax, his chest heaving with exertion. The stench of burned flesh and molten metal filled the air, but he ignored it, his focus already turning to the next phase of his desperate mission. He strode to the command ship's central computer, his fingers flying over the holographic interface as he hacked into the Mizarian systems. Data streamed across the screen in a dizzying blur of alien glyphs and symbols, but Jesse's augmented mind processed it all with ease, searching for any weakness he could exploit. Then he saw it, a single line of code buried deep within the ship's core programming. The Overmind. Jesse's eyes widened as he delved deeper, realization dawning. The Mizarians weren't acting of their own free will. They were being controlled, their every action dictated by a vast, malevolent AI that spanned the entire fleet. He knew what he had to do. If he could take out the Overmind, it would throw the Mizarians into chaos, giving the human colony a chance to evacuate. Jesse's fingers danced across the interface, writing a virus from scratch. It was a thing of beauty, a sleek and deadly piece of code designed to seek out the Overmind's neural network and tear it apart from the inside. He took a deep breath and hit the upload button. The virus streaked into the system, burrowing deep into the Mizarian network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship shuddered, alarms blaring as the Overmind detected the intrusion. "Warning!" A cold metallic voice echoed through the bridge. "Foreign code detected, initiating countermeasures." Jesse cursed, his hands a blur as he fought to keep the virus active. The Overmind was more powerful than he'd anticipated, its defenses adapting to purge the foreign code from its systems. Suddenly, Jesse felt a wrenching sensation in his gut. His vision blurred, then dissolved into a storm of pixelated light. When it cleared, he found himself standing in a vast, featureless void, his body replaced by a glowing wireframe avatar. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking down at his digital hands. "You are a persistent pest." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, cold and inhuman. A shape coalesced in the void before him, a pulsating mass of neurons and synapses the size of a small moon. The Overmind. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Jesse summoned a flickering blade of code to his hand, settling into a combat stance. "Let's dance, you overgrown circuit board." The Overmind's reply was a barrage of searing data bolts, which Jesse barely managed to deflect with his code blade. He retaliated with a flurry of his own attacks, the two titans clashing in a storm of flashing light and surging energy. Back and forth they fought, neither giving ground. The Overmind lashed out with spidering tendrils of corrupted data, seeking to envelop Jesse's avatar and tear it apart bit by bit. But Jesse was too quick, his digital form darting and weaving through the onslaught, his blade carving burning gashes into the AI's pulsing form. Time lost all meaning in the digital realm, seconds stretching into subjective hours as the battle raged. Jesse could feel himself tiring, his concentration fraying at the edges. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. In a flash of inspiration, he lunged forward, hurling his blade with all his might. The Overmind lashed out, catching the weapon in a web of crackling energy, but it was a feint. With the AI distracted, Jesse unleashed his true attack, a cascading deletion algorithm that tore through the Overmind's defenses like wildfire. The AI convulsed, a digital scream of anguish echoing through the void as the algorithm began to unravel its very being. "No!" The Overmind's voice fragmented, dissolving into a discordant static. "I cannot, will not, be defeated by mere meat, flesh." But it was too late. The deletion algorithm had done its work, the Overmind's core programming disintegrating into streams of incoherent data. With a final pixelated shudder, the AI collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but flickering motes of light in its wake. Jesse felt a lurching sensation as his consciousness was hurled back into his physical body. He opened his eyes to the sight of the command ship's bridge, consoles dark and emergency lights flashing. On the view screen, the Mizarian fleet drifted aimlessly, their ships dead in space. With the Overmind destroyed, the entire armada had been thrown into disarray, their central command severed like marionettes with their strings cut. Jesse slumped back in the command chair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was battered, exhausted, and utterly spent, but victorious. Against all odds, he'd bought the human colony the time it needed to escape. Now all that remained was to get himself off this blasted ship and back to the Defiant, because this war was far from over. And if there was one thing Captain Jesse Adams knew how to do, it was fight, until his dying breath for the survival of his species. With the Overmind destroyed and the Mizarian fleet in chaos, Jesse seized his chance. He sprinted through the command ship's twisting corridors, his boots pounding on the metal deck. Alarms blared, emergency lights flashing red. He had to move fast. Jesse skidded to a halt in the reactor control room, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. He overrode the safety protocols, setting the reactor to overload. A countdown began, angry red numbers ticking down to oblivion. "Warning," the ship's AI intoned. "Reactor overload imminent. Evacuation recommended." Jesse ignored it, turning to race back to the Defiant. The corridors were a maze of debris and sparking wires, the ship shuddering as system after system failed. Mizarian stragglers stumbled through the chaos, their compound eyes wide with fear. Jesse dodged past them, plasma rifle at the ready. He burst into the hangar bay, the Defiant waiting like a crouching predator. Jesse leaped through the airlock, slamming his fist on the control panel. The ship sealed behind him with a hiss of hydraulics. "Get us out of here," he barked, strapping into the pilot's seat. The Defiant roared to life, fusion engines flaring. It tore out of the hangar just as the command ship's reactor detonated. A blinding flash of plasma engulfed the Mizarian fleet, the closely packed vessels erupting like a string of firecrackers. Hundreds of battleships vanished in the maelstrom, reduced to atoms. The Defiant rode the shockwave, shields flaring, hull groaning under the immense stress. Jesse gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the ship steady as it bucked and shuddered. Alarms wailed, the view screen filled with static. Then silence. The Defiant drifted in the void, its sensors struggling to pierce the dissipating plasma cloud. Jesse slumped back in his seat, exhausted, battered, but alive. He watched the Mizarian armada burn, a savage grin splitting his face. He'd struck a crippling blow to the insectoid empire, bought humanity precious time. But the elation was short-lived. The comms crackled, Admiral Roth's face resolving through the static. The old soldier looked haggard, his eyes haunted. "Jesse," he said, his voice grim. "The colony gets under attack. Mizarian ground forces, they slipped past the fleet. The colonists are defenseless." Jesse's blood ran cold. He'd been so focused on the space battle, he hadn't considered the planet below. The colonists, civilians, families, they stood no chance against the ruthless Mizarian invaders. He stared at the console, mind racing. The Defiant was badly damaged, its weapons depleted. They couldn't take on a ground assault, not like this, but he couldn't abandon the colonists to their fate. They were his people, his responsibility. A cold realization settled over him, a leaden weight in his gut. There was only one way to save the colony, to buy the rest of humanity the time it needed to escape. One final, desperate gambit. "Roth," Jesse said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within, "I need you to evacuate as many colonists as you can. Get them to the ships, get them off-world." "What about you?" Roth asked, his eyes narrowing. Jesse took a deep breath, his decision made. "I'm going to end this once and for all." He cut the link before Roth could respond, turning to the Defiant's AI. "Plot a collision course with the colony," he ordered, his voice raw. "Overload the reactor on my command." "Understood, Captain," the AI replied, its voice eerily calm. "Impact in 5 minutes." Jesse closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He thought of the colonists, of the lives he was about to cut short, but he also thought of the rest of humanity scattered across the stars, fighting for survival. They needed a future, a hope, and he would give it to them, no matter the cost. He activated the ship's comms, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Captain Jesse Adams, of the ISS Defiant," he said, his voice steady. "To all surviving humans across the galaxy, don't give up. Keep fighting, keep believing. We will prevail, no matter the odds. Our spirit, our unity, our indomitable will, that is something the Mizarians can never conquer." Jesse took a shuddering breath, watching the colony grow larger on the view screen. The Defiant hurtled towards the planet's surface, alarms blaring, the hull glowing cherry red with the heat of re-entry. "Remember us," Jesse whispered, bracing for impact. "Remember what we sacrificed, what we fought for, and never ever stop fighting for our future among the stars." The Defiant slammed into the planet's surface, and Jesse's world erupted into fire and light. The ship's reactor detonated, the explosion consuming the Mizarian ground forces, the colony, everything. A second sun bloomed on the planet's surface, a final defiant testament to humanity's resolve. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.